I've been invisible to my father for 17 years. I was standing in the hospital hallway when the nurse told me my father had been asking for someone named Daniel. My hands tightened around the coffee cup I was holding. I told her my name was Daniel, and she looked confused. She said he had been calling out for Daniel all night, but when she asked about his family, he only mentioned my older brother James. My chest tightened, and the coffee cup crumpled slightly in my grip. I walked toward his room and paused outside the door. Through the window, I could see him lying in the hospital bed with tubes running from his arms. He looked smaller than I remembered. My brother James was already inside, sitting in the chair closest to the bed. I pushed open the door, and the sound made my father turn his head. His eyes moved past me and landed on James like I wasn't even there. James stood up and walked over to shake my hand, like we were business associates. He told me Dad had been drifting in and out of consciousness all morning. I pulled a chair to the opposite side of the bed and sat down. The heart monitor beeped steadily in the silence between us. My father's eyes were open, but he was staring at the ceiling. I said his name, and his head turned slightly. He looked at me for a moment and then looked back at James. His hand reached out toward my brother, and James grabbed it immediately. I watched their fingers interlock and felt something crack inside my chest. The beeping of the machine seemed to get louder. A nurse came in to check his vitals, and I pressed my back against the chair. She adjusted something on the IV, and the liquid dripped faster through the tube. I always believed my father simply preferred James because he was the firstborn. I told myself it was natural for fathers to bond more with their oldest sons. I convinced myself that his absence from my baseball games and science fairs was just because he was busy with work. I thought maybe if I worked harder or achieved more, he would finally notice me. Last year, I graduated top of my class, and he didn't come to the ceremony. I sent him photos, and he never responded. I thought his silence was just how he expressed himself. I thought wrong. The nurse came back in holding a clipboard and asked which one of us was Daniel. I raised my hand slowly. She handed me an envelope and said my father had given it to her that morning. I turned the envelope over in my hands and saw my name written in his shaky handwriting. James leaned forward in his chair, trying to see what it was. I tore open the envelope and pulled out a stack of folded papers. The first page was a letter dated from 3 months ago. My hands started trembling as I read the opening line. It said he had been writing me letters for 17 years, but never had the courage to send them. The second page was older and yellowed at the edges. It described my first steps and how proud he was that day. I looked up at my father, and his eyes were wet. He whispered something I couldn't hear. I leaned closer, and he said it again. He said he was afraid. I asked him, afraid of what? He closed his eyes, and a tear rolled down his cheek. James grabbed the papers from my hands and started flipping through them. His face went pale as he read page after page. There were dozens of letters spanning my entire childhood. Letters about my Little League games that he watched from his car in the parking lot. Letters about my graduation that he attended but left before the ceremony ended. I snatched the papers back and kept reading. One letter described how he drove to my apartment every month just to see my light on. Another described the birthday gifts he bought but never delivered because he didn't know what to say. My father's hand moved across the bed toward me. I stared at it for a long moment. James stood up and walked to the window with his arms crossed. The heart monitor beeped faster. The final letter in the stack explained everything. My father wrote that he had been diagnosed with depression when I was born and pushed everyone away. He said he convinced himself I was better off without him in my life. He wrote that watching James raise his own son made him realize he had wasted 17 years hiding from me. He said he was sorry and he understood if I never forgave him. I set the papers down on the bed and looked at my father. His eyes were open and focused on my face for the first time I could remember. His hand was still reaching toward me across the white hospital sheets. I reached out and wrapped my fingers around his. His grip was weak, but he squeezed as hard as he could. James walked out of the room without saying goodbye. My father pulled my hand closer and pressed it against his chest. I sat there holding my father's hand while the heart monitor beeped steadily beside us.